actually, although we don't believe in gods, we don't believe in anything supernatural. So atheism is really a little limiting, and as others have said, there wouldn't be any need for a word like atheism if it weren't for deists. If there wasn't people claiming this, there wouldn't be any need to say, no, I'm not persuaded. More importantly, we really don't think beliefs of any kind are as important as how we get our beliefs. Or to put it another way, we believe that thinking is much more important than believing. And you realize that the thinking is the active process, and the belief is just where you kind of hold off and, okay, that seems good enough for now. Beliefs were never meant to be held permanently. They shouldn't be. So this is a church that doesn't tell you what to believe, except to believe that thinking is really what matters. Now, some might suppose that this is just science. Recognize that guy? Yeah, that's right. Thought that was an interesting stained glass window with Neil deGrasse Tyson. So this is not just science. But many people do think that religion equals the supernatural and that the opposite of supernatural is science, but not so fast. The opposite of the supernatural includes science, but there's more to the human condition than science that is still not supernatural. Are you following me? So let's consider it the other way around. Science is the sense that we make of objective reality. And what we mean by objective reality is reality that is intersubjective. Our perceptions just happen to be comparable from person to person, the sort that anyone can perceive with their ordinary senses, that's observer independent. We can even build machines to perceive these kinds of things for us, objective reality. And certainly the information that came in, certainly the information that came in from the Cassini space probe that went to Saturn, all that information that came in, that was all equally available to everybody. We could argue about the interpretation, but that's an example of objective reality. But human experience is not all of this kind. Much of our perception, probably most of it, is subjective, or it is subjectively colored. The same objective experience is colored by these different qualities for different people. And none of that is science as such. So now we may ask, what is the opposite of science? What is the opposite of objective perceptions in the sense that we make of them? Well, it's not the supernatural. Your feelings, your dreams, your fears, and we'll be talking more about that in a moment, all of that is not supernatural. It may be beyond the physical natural world and metaphysical or supernatural in that sense, for how could we ever have an understanding of just what, for example, consciousness is? Yes, there are those who are working on this, but suppose we could peer into the brain and see what every neuron, every neurotransmitter, every molecule, every atom and ion, and we could see what it was doing. Would that satisfy us that we had found consciousness? Well, we correspond to consciousness and all that. So the big chasm is not between mind and matter as the natural and the supernatural, it's between mind and matter as subjective and objective. That's the big divide. And strangely, it's the objective, the world of objective reality that we think of primary, that's really derivative and only a subset of all of our perceptions. So science is just not enough, so to speak. Even if we got to the point where the dream you had last night could be confidently explained by mental health professionals, and even if your dream could be accounted for in exact physical terms, and even if science could predict and explain after monitoring you, measuring you in somewhere, we could even say exactly how you describe your dream and what it means to you. Still, no one but you could know what your dream and its meaning was like to you. And that's what the NTCOF is predicated on, that religion is just the sense that we try to make out of our subjective experience, just as science is the sense that we try to make out of objective experience. The opposite of religion is science. The opposite of science is not superstition, but rather religion understood in this way. Now, whoever wants to can insist that religion is supernatural. That doesn't make that claim true. Just like somebody saying there's a God doesn't make that true. Just because the study of the motion of the stars and planets was once superstition doesn't mean it always has to be. To say that religion has to be supernaturalism leaves no room for real religion. And what does it do, really, given the First Amendment's protections of religious liberty, to say that religion has to be superstition? Did James Madison, of all people, intend to carve out special protection for false ideas and their applications? And is it really religion anyway to insist on the counterfactual, to say, for example, that a supernatural being poofed everything into existence, that the earth is 6,000 years old, that cold, dead bodies become living people again, that winged horses carry people around. This is nonsense and pseudoscience. Even people who claim to believe in these things can't get away with committing crimes by saying that God told them to do it, or because the Bible said that people with dark skin have a divine curse on them. These believers, they don't believe in such things in any meaningful, practical way, not since the abolition of slavery and the last generation that practiced that abomination. Catherine, this is Kit, and she brought some things it looks like for child care, so if Merritt would like to go with her, she'll show him a good time. And Kit will have a good time too, I'm sure. So that's what we're about. This is a quote from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Everything that religion has always been about, minus the supernatural, that's what we're about. Our goal is to explore the many things there are to think about, how to think more broadly, more deeply, and how to avoid mistakes in thinking and correct them when we find them. We're here to help each other do these things, to help each other create more light and hopefully less hate. We're here to learn from each other and thereby grow and become better people, each in our own way. We're not looking for grace or salvation, but just that sense of, oh, I see, or now I've got it. The sense of our minds having gotten somewhere instead of parked in a dogmatic belief that it's sinful even to doubt. Yesterday was, this is a quote from Robert Ingersoll. How many know who Robert Ingersoll was? Yeah, so you need to read him too. Yesterday was International Blasphemy Day, September 30th. That's the anniversary of the Muhammad cartoons that were published in the Danish newspaper Jyllands-Posten. Not sure how to speak Danish very well. That was in 2005, so here we are 12 years later. Amazingly, a number of EU countries still have laws against blasphemy, including, I had to be careful when I was there recently, Italy, also Greece, Portugal, and Spain, certainly Turkey, which is like to be EU. And in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and some other countries, blasphemy is a capital offense. Just think of that on this day.
Not in the laws in terms of it. I mean, capital offense for the church, and the church just.
I know in Wikipedia there was Turkey was one of the countries that was listed as laws against blasphemy. I don't think a capital offense.
Maybe Pakistan, it's in the law.
Yes.
I'm not sure, but it's not in the law, so to speak. But you
In
can
Turkey?
No.
Okay. All right. I will take you as I'll assume you're correct.
Well, it's not for now.
Nogan is from Turkey. She grew up there.
It's not for now, but who knows where it's going to go down.
Well, who knows what it's going to be here too? We have people running around saying everybody has a right to not be offended. So on this day, October 1st, Yosemite National Park was established by Congress in 1890. How many have been to Yosemite? Okay, those of you who haven't been there need to go there. Definitely a national treasure. Also on this day,
Doctor,
yes,
could you go back to that picture, please?
yes,
Maybe you aren't aware, but El Capitan is the one on the left here.
yeah.
And a slab of that, about 130 feet long and 80 feet wide and weighing 2,300 tons, fell down and killed that person.
Oh,
That injured his wife just this last week
oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Well, that's in the news too then.
Where is this located?
In California?
in California.
Yeah.
But you're looking at, may I?
Yes,
Eastern.
here, this little black button here is the pointer.
This is El Capitan. This is half dome. It looks like a half dome. And there's 1,300 feet of vertical rock there that people use for rock climbing. It's very difficult because it is vertical. In fact, some of it, as you can see right from here, the last 200 feet is overhanging. So it gets to be pretty difficult. This is supposed to be Bridal Falls, and it's about 900 feet high. Give you a perspective of the size of things here. And of course, this whole park is, the base of the park is sitting around 1,400 feet MSL, but the peaks are running around 5,500 in that particular area. The Sierra Madre runs around 6,500 feet on average.
Thank you, Merlin. Merlin knows a lot of stuff. And we're going to get into speakers again too on one of his.
Been there and flown over it.
Yeah. I looked for drone footage, and there's some on YouTube, but not much because apparently they outlawed drones in Yosemite. So, find drone footage from all these wonderful places in the world. Okay, also on October 1st, the slogan first appeared on U.S. currency in 1957. NASA was established in 1958 on this day. And on this day, right now today, Jimmy Carter is 93 years old. Well, although as said, this church does not have dogmas and doctrines, we have this creed of sorts, and perhaps it's more kind of what we aspire to. I'd like to know what you think of this. For sure, you can email us and make suggestions. Length is longer, but we're not trying to compete with the Humanist Manifesto. Of course, the most effort is put into our monthly service, but we have other things going on all through the month, and that's on the back of on page 2 of the bulletin. We always can do more, but it takes people to come up with the ideas and to put them into action. So, we could restart the book club at any time, have a movie group, all sorts of stuff. So, how about you? No pressure. But realize that we're open to doing more, and we welcome new ideas, and especially volunteer efforts, because nobody makes any money from this church. Well, I suppose the hotel does, and other people that we buy goods and services, but lots of people make money off you too, and all the things you have to buy and so forth. But it's really a labor of love, and we can hope maybe a tiny step in moving towards a future without supernatural religions. How else could it possibly happen? And we have from the beginning offered free child care and Sunday school at our services. As you saw, I guess Catherine went over to join that for now. But again, the church is what we make of it. Volunteers are always welcome and needed, and thank you so much to our volunteers. Bertha is coming in without being paid anything. We'll talk a little bit more about Bertha in a moment. John is our videographer, so lots of people putting their shoulders to the wheel. Next month, always subject to change, we plan a service on religion. There's more to it than I've outlined earlier. What is it? What is religion for? Do we need it? Do people need it? Some people seem to, but what is it that they really need? Can we live without it? Is it really reasonable to suppose that the world will ever be without it? And just how would that come about? And the rest of today's, sorry, I guess when I resized it, I put a G off of the bottom. Overcoming fear. The rest of today's service belongs to our guest speaker, Freethought Robinson. Freethought started attending church because you were a teenager.
Yeah.
Because we've been around for over 20 years. And then she went off to college, got her degree, and became a licensed professional counselor, and now she works as a professional in mental health. And she's going to talk to us about the subject of overcoming fear. So please welcome Freethought. And you have a little pocket to pop that into. And let me put this on.
All right, good. Good morning. So today I'm going to talk about overcoming fear, and based on a lot of my work with, especially group therapy, one thing I hear a lot is, why do we have to have these unpleasant emotions such as fear, sadness, and anger? And pretty much all emotions have a purpose. And I think before we overcome any emotion, we have to understand and acknowledge its purpose. And the purpose of fear basically is it keeps us safe. Species that run away from danger have more of a survival advantage than species that go up and say hi. It provokes pretty much a physiological response. Our adrenaline starts to pump. Our eyes dilate so they can take in more sensory information. Blood flows to the extremities, which prepares us to act, to attack, to defend ourselves. The unfortunate part of all this is that our rational thought shuts down. So while all this may have been very good for our survival in the African savanna millions of years ago, in this day and age when we're with road rage and stuff like that, that's not such a good thing that our rational thought shuts down. And that can be where fear goes from being a survival mechanism to a problem in our modern age. We know that phobias are pretty much an intense fear, and sometimes it's an irrational fear of an object. People can have phobias of snakes, people can have phobias of bunnies, people can have phobias of peaches. There's pretty much a phobia for everything. What we do know, though, is people are more likely to develop phobias of things that could harm them. Who in here is scared or has a phobia of snakes?
Ooh.
All right, any clown phobias in here? None. Clown phobias. So that clown phobia is a real thing. It probably affects about 12% of the population. Fear of snakes, about 51%. And we, especially before modern medicine, we're much more likely to die from a snake bite than from seeing a clown. So that's kind of, that fear is kind of in our DNA of snakes, of heights, of things that could harm us. Anyone familiar with Jared Diamond? He's an anthropologist, and he has done a lot of work with, in New Guinea, especially observing the hunter-gatherer societies there. He's also observed some, chieftains where they're getting a bit more settled farming and stuff like that. But in his work with hunter-gatherer societies, he noticed that they're more mindful of low-risk events that, if given enough time, have a probability of happening. One thing he noticed was they won't sleep under trees, and because the tree could fall on you. And at first he thought this was completely silly to be so scared of a tree falling on you, but then he realized he would hear trees falling every night. And that given enough time, this low risk event, if you sleep under enough trees, is bound to happen. And he pretty much labeled this behavior that they have to be very mindful of things that have a low risk of happening, but given enough time could happen, constructive paranoia, because it has a survival advantage in places where you can't call an ambulance, where you don't have modern medicine, where you just have the tribe and whatever they have for healing there. He's become a lot more mindful of getting in and out of the shower, because a lot of people slip and fall getting in and out of the shower. That's not even something a lot of us think about. The other thing I thought was interesting was machismo, this hyper-masculinity, this men who, I don't have any emotions. You don't see that in hunter-gatherer societies. The men in those societies, they will admit that they feel fear, and that it keeps them vigilant and safe to experience that. It's not until you get to the farming societies that you start to see the machismo, macho man develop. So and I hinted a few slides back, fear can become a problem though. So there's a use for fear that we have to acknowledge. It has a survival advantage. However, it does shut down our rational thinking. And we can do really stupid things when our rational thinking is shut down. And I love a good horror movie, and like a lot of people, I will criticize what the person in the horror movie is doing. How could they do something so stupid? The killer's there. Why are you running up the stairs? You should be running out the door. At the same time, I'm not in that house with the killer, so I'm not there with my rational thinking shut down. Well, that dumb blonde is in the house with her rational thinking shut down. So next time you watch a horror, maybe kind of cut the dumb blonde or whoever a bit of slack. But we don't really know how we would act in an emergency situation, because a lot of the times we're reading about it or we're watching it from a safe location with our rational thinking brain. And I'm sure we can all think of times in our life when we have been scared and we have panicked and we may not have handled things as well as we would have liked to. Fear also becomes a problem when it interferes with our ability to live and plan our lives. So Tim kind of was talking a bit about this, and then this week we had my grandmother's memorial service, and she died in July. And one of the things the minister had said was my grandmother was one of the few people she knew who had planned her death, and so she was able to figure out what she wanted in her service, and that most of the time she doesn't know. There's no plan for where they want their body to go. There's no plan for how they want their service to be like, and they're just trying to guess about how they want to honor that person's last wishes. And this can be, funerals. Funerals really are for the living, not for the dead. But it could go into bigger things, such as she wanted to donate her body to science. And that's something that people benefit from, that's something that goes on to save other people's lives. And if she had not specified that she wanted her body to go to science, then she might have just been buried, and that would have been lost. Or, kind of if you have children, I know we have members of the family we do not want our children to go to ever. And we have members of the family that we want our children to go to if anything happens to me and my husband. So that would be something important to put down. But for a lot of people, facing our mortality creates a lot of fear. And it's not, and maybe not even our mortality, but what's going to happen when I take this test. And because they're so scared of taking the test, they don't study for it. I'm just going to fail anyway, so why even bother? So when fear interferes with our ability to plan our lives, but also with our ability to live, because we can get in cycles of fear that create panic attacks. And pretty much panic attacks are the fear of fear. And these feel really real. They can feel like having a heart attack. And they tend to be very embarrassing when they happen in public for people. And the fear of going out in public and having another panic attack is so strong that they start to stay in their homes and not go out and lose jobs. Fear can prevent us from confronting hard truths, and sadly, working with a lot of people with substance use problems, I hear a lot of, I told my mother that her boyfriend was molesting me and she didn't believe me. That mother couldn't confront the hard truth. And meanwhile, that little girl suffered and grew up and repeated the cycle again. So, and also, we tend to fear the wrong things. Who in here is afraid of flying on a plane? All right, so I got one. Who
Makes me nervous.
Makes you nervous?
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of get a bit nervous? Who in here is scared to get into your car? And the thing is, the most dangerous thing most of us are likely to do every day is to get into our car. Cars are it's #2 leading cause of accidental death. It's going down. Safety features are getting better and better all the time. But still, the most dangerous thing we are likely to do every day is get into our car. But we don't hear about car accidents on the news. But we do hear about airplane crashes. And we hear about airplane crashes because they are rare. The other thing is, there are things about getting into a car that's in our control. Whether or not we wear a seatbelt, that's in our control. Whether or not we obey the safety rules, stop at the red lights, that's in our control. Airplanes, we're putting our trust in a pilot, and that's not in our control. So we tend to fear situations where we do not have as much control. So fixing the problem and kind of, to illustrate, I'm going to kind of go to the Costa Concordia disaster. Does anyone remember that? It happened several years ago. And this was a cruise ship that hit some rocks outside an island in Italy. 32 people died, and what really made the news was that the captain abandoned the ship. He completely panicked and abandoned the ship. He was ordered by the Coast Guard to go back to the ship, and he did not. And a lot of the deaths and stuff were attributed to the incompetence of the captain and the crew. The thing is, we might think that this is a rare thing for cruise ships. The thing is, this isn't such a rare thing for cruise ships. There have been several other cases where the captain and the crew have abandoned the ship. There was one where the helicopter was coming to the cruise ship to get people off, and the captain ran past the passengers, pushed one off the way, and climbed up the ladder. I would think twice about ever getting on a cruise ship. But pretty much, and the reason for this is that they don't know what to do when there's an accident. Cruise ship captains, they have the training in how to operate the ship, but they don't have a lot of training into what to do when things go wrong. In contrast, airline pilots are required to spend several hundred hours a year practicing in a simulator what to do if things go wrong. If you remember the movie Apollo 13, you saw those astronauts in the simulator before they got on the ship, practicing what to do if things go wrong. Cruise ship captains, they have the option of doing it, but it's not required, and most don't do it. So when something does go wrong, they don't know what to do, and they panic, and people die. This even, was going back to the Titanic, where, we think of Captain John Edwards as a hero because he didn't leave the ship. Well, he really didn't do much else. He just kind of went into a funk and shut down. And kind of left the rest of the crew to handle a very incompetent evacuation of the ship. And, 1,500 people died on that. So this has been a long-ranging problem. I kind of looked, I have not read about any change since the Costa Concordia disaster in the way that cruise ship captains are trained. But pretty much, the way that we can get around irrational thinking shutting down is by practicing for emergencies. This is why, we all groan about fire drills. This is why fire drills are important and they're not stupid. It's because rather than panicking, we fall into a rote routine. And that kicks in when an emergency happens. This is why emergency professionals have to go through a lot of training so that rote routine kicks in. So, it's not our destiny to freeze and for our rational thinking to go out the window. Our training can kick in, kind of like it does with nurses when they see an emergency. The other thing is when people are anxious about something that's going to happen in the future, usually I say, okay, let's explore that. Let's plan for the worst. What will happen if the thing that you're scared of most happens? I had a woman in my office, she had a one-night stand, and she was so scared she would get pregnant. You know, I can't have a baby right now, I can't afford it, da, da, da. And she had already, you know, taken some plan B, and so it's unlikely to happen. I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, what will you do? And she was like, okay, I'll just go get an abortion. I said, okay, so how do you feel now? She felt better. She had plan C in place. And so a lot of times planning for that worst case scenario causes relief. Because even if it's going to be unpleasant, there's a plan in place, there's a way to move forward. However, kind of going back to the fear of death, that can cause its own feelings of fear and anxiety because a lot of people don't like to think about a time when they won't be around anymore. I notice people fall into two categories. There's people who are scared of dying, and then there's people who are scared of growing old and feeble and not being able to do what they've done all their lives. I kind of fall into the latter category. In this case, though, it's important to lean into our emotions. I think in society we're kind of trained to push our emotions away if they're unpleasant and to not think about them. Really, though, it's important to lean into them and figure out what they're trying to tell us. What are the reasons that we have this fear? Loss of control. We talked about how we experience fear more with things that we can't control. I'd say for people who are scared about growing and feeble, it's about loss of control, about having someone else take care of you. Fear of the unknown. And this goes back to, there's a study, and it found that very religious people and then people who are atheists tend to be the most comfortable about dying because the extreme religious were convinced they would go to heaven. And the atheists are pretty much scared that, you know, there would be nothing. It'd be like the time before they were born and they decompose. But the people in the middle, the agnostics, the not so religious, were the ones who tended to fear death more because they're not so sure what's going to happen. And I guess kind of the way I related to this was with my grandmother. I knew she had donated her body to science, but at her service, I started wondering, well, where is her body? Is it, you know, donating to science? There's a lot of places it could go. Was it going to medical research? Was it going to this? Was she going to be like a body in the Body Works exhibit? And just started wondering all this. So afterwards, you know, I asked my mom, and she said she was at UT Southwestern. I just felt a lot better just knowing where her body was, that it was medical science. So fear of the unknown can be a big one. Fear is something that's happened before. You get this with PTSD where there has been trauma, and you know, people are scared of being in that situation again. And the hard thing with fear of something that hasn't happened before is that it may be rational. If somebody is being bullied at school and they're scared to go to school because they'll be bullied, it's really rational to be afraid that if they go back to school, they're going to be bullied. Fear of anxiety, this is what you get with panic attacks, that fear of fear. And fear of harm. You know, if we're scared that if we go into a situation, we're going to get hurt. The therapeutic benefits of writing have been getting some really interesting research lately. It's really a powerful way to explore our emotions that does decrease our anxiety. And it lessens our chances of doing something called choking. I'll get to choking in a minute. You know, once again, going back to my grandmother, I was also a bit upset that, because I wouldn't have a place where I could, a memorial place for her. There wasn't a gravesite, there wasn't a plaque anywhere. And so I started writing in my diary, and as I was doing that, I realized I need to get a plant. Even though I have a brown thumb, I need to get a plant, and I will name that plant after her, and I will tend to that plant. And that's where I will have my memorial to her. So writing, we tend to find the solutions to what's bothering us. And sure enough, I told my husband at 8 o'clock at night that I was going to Home Depot and got that plant, and I felt a lot better when I got home and I had that plant. So, choking. This is a phenomenon where we've practiced something down cold. The example is you are a sports player and people are looking to recruit you for college, and you know that the college recruiters, they're watching you. And you're the best on the team, yada, 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 but the recruiter's there, and rather than playing well, you choke, you panic, you miss the ball, and the other team wins. And your chance to get that big college scholarship is gone. There was a researcher who literally that happened to her. She lost her sports scholarship that way. She still did get to college, and she went on to study the psychology of choking. And one of the things that she found was that if you, like before a test, if you have students write a bit about testing anxiety or their feelings about taking the test, they perform better on that test than those who don't do it. So before a job interview, or before doing something that causes fear, public speaking, before telling your boss that you want to raise, taking a minute or two to write down how you feel about it lessens your chances of choking and of performing at your best.
So would this be like immediately before the test, or like, a few days before? Or?
Immediately. I'd say an hour or so before. So just kind of. Though I know that in the research trial it was about an hour or so before the test. I don't know if there's a time limit where it runs out or not. That'd be an interesting thing to study. So basically though, for a lot of fears, it boils down to doing what scares you. There's some things that we fear so much, we put so much anxiety. I kind of call this a calculus effect, where somebody goes in, they're like, to a calculus class, and they're like, okay, calculus is really hard. I hear about how hard calculus is all the time. And so they're sitting there and they're making it more difficult than it really is, because they're thinking that calculus is so hard. And then they go and they bomb the first test, and they think, oh, okay, calculus was that hard. Going in instead with the attitude of, hey, calculus could be hard, but I'm smart enough to figure it out, changes things. A lot of, I wish there was a magic bullet to just get rid of fear, but a lot of it is just doing the hard work of exposing yourself to what it is that you fear. For instance, if you are terrified of snakes, exposing yourselves to snakes in safe conditions. I'm not a big snake fan, but whenever I go to the zoo, I pet the snake to make sure that fear of snakes doesn't go out of hand. Albert Ellis, he was an influential therapist. He founded a type of therapy called rational emotive behavioral therapy. And one of the things that he was really scared of was talking to women. And pretty much any straight man, he wanted to be very good at talking to women. So what he would do is he would go to a park every day, and he would make himself talk to women until he got to the point where he was really comfortable talking to women. And especially when things are really anxious, if you work with a therapist with rational emotive behavioral or cognitive behavioral techniques, they can teach you things such as breathing exercises to calm down. It's a whole system of pretty much exposing yourself and then calming yourself down, reminding yourself that you're safe, that it goes through. And then I think it's interesting to look at how we manage our fears. And especially if you read about something called emotional regulation, especially if you have young kids, you might have heard about it with parenting, that rather than teaching our kids to behave, we should teach them to control their emotions or regulate their emotions. And one big debate I see, especially as somebody who loves scary stories and scary movies, is if these have a role or a purpose in our society. And pretty much they're, seeing that kids who read these, they're better at controlling stronger emotions such as fear and anger because they are practicing that while reading scary stories. Activities such as getting on swings and that back and forth and controlling the anxiety, that helps kids learn to control those emotions. And I don't see why that wouldn't work with anxious adults, except roller coasters. Controlled breathing is the other thing. When we panic, we're more likely to hyperventilate. And a lot of the times what people do is they remember to breathe in, they forget to breathe out. And if they're not breathing out, there's all that carbon dioxide that's building up and is contributing to the fear or the anger or whatever overwhelming emotion. So for a lot of the breathing, it's to focus on breathing, taking the time to breathe out and make sure you're getting all of that out of your system, and that helps to calm down. Happy Halloween.
I'm sure Frithought will take some questions. Good example of how, things from the sciences can help us with our feelings. One of the things I just was struck by and realized more and more as I grow older, how little control we have over how we feel. We know that we don't have control over the outside world, things happen, and it's not what happens to you, it's how you react to it. But even how we react to things is not necessarily up to us. It really is a great effort to, but this is good to know some of these techniques.
Well, and I think that's kind of one of the focuses on counseling is you can't control your feelings. And you have to admit them and own them. You can control what you do about it. But, it's kind of, emotions pretty much are how energy moves in our brain. And, we don't have a lot of control over that.
There are a lot of fears in this world, and although we all have our own little fears, I'm thinking of Africa, the Middle East, Albania. So many places that people really, every day is a fearful, overwhelming fear. It's a real thing. Fear is real. And people talk here today about, some of their kind of fears. But it's not like, some of the people that are afraid someone's going to kill you or chop you up or blow you up. There's a tremendous amount of horror in this world. And our fear, when you look at that, it's still overwhelming. I think you can deal with it better if you do something.
Yeah. I think a lot of times having that illusion that you're doing something, even whether or not you really can be powerful to people, because I think the big thing right now is North Korea, and if a nuclear war is going to happen, and I don't think there's much that we can do about that, but people, sometimes find getting activist causes can believe, make them feel that they're doing something.
I think, in my mind, the best thing that you brought out was, what is the worst case scenario? What is the worst thing that can happen? And if you look at it from that direction, I think it alleviates a lot of the fear.
Nuclear war?
Right?
Well, with North Korea, it could be nuclear war. If they shoot at us, we're gonna shoot at
I
them.
won't touch that subject.
But I think that's true, you know, a lot of our everyday fears, well, if I do this, if I do that, but there's some line in the movie, I forget what movie it was, I've seen so many movies where one of the characters says, well, what are they gonna do, spank you?
Yeah.
You know, you're grown up, you know, there's somebody looking after you but you. And so maybe sometimes it's useful to just, you know, when you feel fear and panic, what is it that you're actually afraid of? The problem, of course, is that when people feel fear, there's nothing really connected to it. And both that, and I think sometimes people have problems with feelings of overwhelming sadness, and loneliness as well. And we'll have to do that with another church service. Will you come after that?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
here's the talking stick. Want to make sure everybody can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Well, one thing I wanted to just, I was really relieved when you said that horror movies can actually help you with dealing with fear, because I'm a huge horror movie fan. I have a friend who's a Buddhist who tells me that when I die, I'm going to like relive everything I've ever seen in every horror movie. So I'm glad I can tell him, no, science supports this is actually a good movie. So, and I just wondered if you could, about the breathing, because that's something that I have been trying to do to deal with in my own fears. Is there any particular, because I know there's like all these different, you know, 4-4 breathing, just, you know, all different kinds of formulas. Is there anything that seems to particularly work, or is it really just a matter of making sure that you're exhaling enough?
Really just making sure that you're exhaling enough, and really just finding what works best for you. You know, some people will swear by this, other people will swear by this. It's kind of like toothpaste, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you.
I tried, in response to what you were asking, I was in a helicopter for the first time. And I was up in a B-24 a couple of years ago. And although I'm not scared of flying, if you're in a B-24, a real one, an old one, and things shake, and there's big holes or windows where you would shoot out, but there's no guns there, but you would look out and there's no window there, and the wind was coming in. And you look on the other side, and there's another hole with a big, with the wind coming in. And that was kind of scary. I started to breathe and relax. And then I decided to get up, and I moved toward the front of the plane. And then I got scared because there's a big hole where all the bombs are dropped. Well, that opening was open. But anyways, I kept on walking, and I got up front, and then I went back. So, part of it was breathing, feeling comfortable, doing something, action, and talking to myself of what to do. Stop, think, options, proceed. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, I can,
You have to hold it up close to your mouth.
it this way. Well, I've experienced what a true panic attack is, and I don't know how you can plan for it. And this is when I was in a car, and my son had a heart attack. And it's like everything shuts down as far as what do you do? And my phone couldn't find it. I found a person in the park, and when I went over there and she had a phone to try try and call for help, that your mind goes blank as to where you are. I can say the park's name, but when they're wanting an address, I can't even remember. And so I have this fear now that if someone's life is depending on me, that I won't be able to react appropriately. And that scares me.
Yeah. And that is hard because, you know, there are some things that we can plan for, but there's a lot that's unexpected. And it could just be, okay, now that, there's a lot of variables, but, you know, being aware of surroundings, you know, practice drills, where am I, who do I call, stuff like that. But yeah, there's sometimes, I guess one of those, the hard truths is, there's a lot that we can plan for, and then there's stuff that we can't. Yeah.
I guess that goes a little bit to what I was saying, is that, you know, we all expect to be in control, and we don't realize really, even when we think we're in control, we're not. There's so many things that, you know, can impinge on us.
One of the things I thought about during your lecture is a relationship between fear and stress. You know, the question in my mind, is stress just fear? You know, and I mean, sitting here thinking, well, to some degree, yes, it is. But also, you know, there's really, you know, I mean, I guess there's non-fear related stress, right? Being overwhelmed at work, but maybe it's a fear that you won't get all your work done. But, you know, I don't know. Do you think some of these fear responses would work to manage stress?
Yes, they would work to manage stress. There's a lot of, in fact, a lot of these fear responses would work to manage anger, to manage a lot of the, you know, it would work to manage sadness. I would say that fear is a form of stress. If you have fear, you have stress. I would not necessarily say that stress is fear. So it's one of those.
Here's a subset of stress, not liver.
And, you know, it goes to that if we didn't have stress, we wouldn't survive because we wouldn't do anything. It might be like the end of Serenity, the society that just sits down and dies because they don't do anything.
I will say it has a useful effect to some degree. Motivated me to stay to the party, man.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's the usefulness of
Fear,
it.
you know, it's a combination of fear and stress for sure.
Well, you talked about writing as a way to deal with fear. And do you know more about how to structure that writing? Is it just writing about the fear? Can you say anything more about that? Are there any books or anything about that?
Just, you know, sitting down and writing about the emotions. You know, I'm feeling this right now, I'm feeling this right now. There's not a specific format. I know of a few articles about it. I don't know of an actual book about it. But yeah, just, it's one of those is kind of, you know, a lot of times people know what they need to do, but they don't want to say it out loud. A lot of the times we have the answers within ourselves, and writing's just a way to get that out on paper. So I don't want to be kind of like strict 5-paragraph thing, but just focus on the emotions would be the big thing.
How about talking to a dictaphone or to your, what is the language translator, you know, the computer will just write down what you say?
I don't see why that wouldn't work, especially if you're more of a speaker person than a writing person. But yeah, I think.
I'll just speak up. How do you think that fear relates to political orientation? I kind of have a theory that maybe conservatives are more fearful than liberals when it relates to change. They're afraid of change. Is that generally true, or do liberals just kind of fear something different?
I will say with conservatives, there is a lot of fear of change. There's
Maybe
a
a
lot
loss
of authoritarianism.
A loss of control?
At the same time, you see fear stoking on both sides, but for a lot of the conservatives, it's fear of the other. For among a lot of liberals, it's fear of the people who are in power. And, we may have ideas about who is right, but, there's fear of other people who are different than us, fear of change, fear of our way of life being destroyed. Where among liberals, it's fear of what the people in power are going to do, Big Brother, stuff like that.
One of these things, as far as politics goes, I don't know if we've talked about this at church, but this thing called the precautionary principle, have people heard about that? It's kind of big in the environmentalist movements where when things come up, they'll say, well, we shouldn't do this because even though it has only a very tiny, tiny, tiny risk, the consequences would be so great that we just can't take that risk. And I remember this came up, for example, when they were building a Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Europe, that people were saying, whoa, what if this machine made a teeny tiny microscopic black hole and it just sucked the whole world in there? We can't take the chance of that. And of course, the scientists all got together and said, this is just so vanishingly small, it's not even worth thinking about. But I think probably both political sides, or all political sides, I don't know how many there are, there are these kind of free-floating fears.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting because you get the anti-vax at both the extreme left and the extreme right. Among the extreme left, it's big pharma fears, and among the extreme right, it's, tradition, faith-based healing, stuff like that.
That's a good point. The anti-vax is on both extremes. Mm-hmm. With respect to stress, Connie's got a question about whether stress and fear are the same. One thing about stress is that I think, you correct me if this is wrong, but I think that the mental health professionals generally say that stress comes from any kind of changes in your life over which you have no control. But that could be something like a new, better job, or having a child, things that people normally think of as happy. I know in my practice when I ask people about stress, they'll just go to the bad things. And I have to point out to them that it's all the other changes too. Even moving into a new home where everything is not in the same place that you're used to, the risk of accidents goes up. Many people are just not aware of the risks that comes from change over which you have no control, even when the change is, quote unquote, a happy one.
And that is true. One of my psychology classes, they had a table of things that cause stress, and they did a stress metric, and it included things like getting married, having a baby, getting a job, moving, things that people would consider positive life changes, because even with positive life changes, there's stress. Having a baby is a lot of stress. Starting a new job, there's that learning curve at a new job. That's a lot of stress too. And even if you're really good at the job, you have to figure out the new work environment.
Well, so physiologically, I think I read, and I'm not asking if this is true. So physiologically, your body doesn't know the difference between good stress and bad stress. Is that correct? So it's reacting the same whether it's something that's scary and it's causing you bad stress, or if it's like getting married or something good and it's causing you positive stress. Is that the case?
I'd say there's a difference in, I don't know for sure, but I'd say there's a difference in how bad stress and good stress feels. It can be draining in both cases, but I think there's more of a weight of oppression with the bad stress, and with the good stress, it's kind of more kind of this hyper feeling energized to do things. So that can, go bad in some cases, especially.
I've also read, I don't know how you do this, but that if you are, and this is particularly, I guess, with anxiety, but if you're experiencing anxiety, if you can reframe it as excitement, that then it doesn't have the same, it doesn't affect you the same way as anxiety. So, but I'm not sure, how you do that.
So it can, if the situation's worse. I don't know how I'm going to get anyone excited about a root canal, but But, you know, if the situation works, then yeah. See?
Reframing.
Mhm.
We talk to ourselves.
I'm changing the subject.
Okay,
This microphone doesn't work very well.
I can hear you.
And what is the background that you're using for discussion?
That was something that Tim selected.
I'm not sure whether that's hers or mine. She sent me a PowerPoint slide, and the only thing I edited it with is the open office presentation software. So some of it wasn't quite right, and I had to redo the backgrounds on some of them. But this is, you know, at least in the open office, it's the same as PowerPoint. You have these different backgrounds, and this is under the bitmap thing, because they have gradients and things like that. So
It looked like one of those 3D things you sort of cross your eye and the pattern will come out.
yeah, it almost
And
does.
to see a monster there, that's what I was thinking of.
It almost does. Is that, you know, does that have some kind of subliminal message? Is that what you're cueing in on, David? Is it giving you a headache?
I'm curious, it seems like a new background.
You could have a subliminal message in there.
Well, I want to thank Freethought for coming and speaking to us. This was really helpful. As you can tell, she's very knowledgeable and almost, you know, and she can cite some of the research findings, and that's just really perfect for us. Thank you so much for the
Where's Bob?
Thanks for having me.